Namaste, yogis. How are you? I'm Suzanne Dulin, and welcome to Meet a Yogi. Today, I have two guests with me, and we're talking about an important topic, which is how to support a loved one who is considering suicide or who is having suicidal thoughts. I'd like to introduce my guests to you, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what you're going to learn in this call. Looking forward to sharing all this information with you. Feel free to put notes in the comments if you're watching this on the replay, and I will respond back with you, or our guests will respond back to you if you have any questions. So first, we have Chris Edwards. Chris, you can wave.
Hello.
Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
Chris is an entrepreneur, but his first business did not go according to plan. When his business closed, he battled severe depression and suicidal thoughts. This was not the first time that he had waged this battle either. Chris had to find his lifeline and start again. He found a new Everest to climb. Now he challenges others to openly tell their stories of battling depression. This will help others and make it less taboo in our society. Chris believes that by telling his story, it will give someone else hope and save their life. Thank you so much for being brave to talk about this subject. I'm looking forward to our conversation in just a minute. And then I have Joe Roberson. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, Suzanne. Long time no see.
Joe has been a frequent guest here on SADHANA, and he will be talking with us tonight. First of all, he is an artist. He's an author. He's a yoga teacher. He has run 7 yoga teacher trainings. He's an instructional designer, and he is the author of the book One Half Breath at a Time. In this book, you can discover how to turn stress and anxiety into calm and ease, productive power and joy with breath-centered practices. This book includes evidence from research and pilot programs in military, law enforcement, firefighters, and other first responders. And tonight, Joe will be sharing with us some of that information on the research that has been done. Thank you, Joe. And I'm just opening up my notes because the phone is closed. So I want to tell you, I'm going to switch my view. And then I want to tell you a little bit about tonight's topic. So I volunteered on a listening hotline for 2 years. So even though the warm line where I volunteered was not a suicide call line per se, we did receive a lot of training in handling a suicide call, because it was vitally important that we be able to serve people well when they were contemplating ending their lives. So in this call, Chris will be sharing about how it felt to contemplate suicide and giving some tips from his own experience. And then Joe will be sharing some of the warning signs that somebody might be considering suicide, and about the Project Welcome Home Troops program, which helps veterans who have PTSD. And then I'm going to share what it's like to call a listening hotline, the resources that they can provide, and give you 3 tips for talking to a loved one who you suspect is suicidal. This is in the realm of yoga, and there's 4 different areas of spirituality. There's the connection to yourself, connection to community, connection to nature, and the connection to the transcendent. This call, we're going to be focusing on connection to community. Our overall message in this call is how important it is to reach out for support if you are considering suicide, and how important it is to reach out to someone that you are concerned about. And we're going to give you some resources to help a loved one that you think might be in need, and also some resources to help you decide whether it is time to step in or not. So I'm going to switch now to our first guest, Chris. Chris, welcome. Can you go ahead and speak so I can make sure that you are going to be recorded properly?
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That sounds right. All right.
You sound great, and better yet, I'm seeing you on the screen. So,
Yes.
Chris, welcome to the show. It's your first time here, and I wanted you to start by telling us a little bit about your experience of considering suicide.
Well, the first time that I battled this beast, which is the way I look at it, was year 3 in college. I was 21 years old. I was living kind of a dual life. I was doing really well in the martial arts, winning tournament after tournament, striving, doing well. I was working on trying to finish a degree, but I was a maniac partying nonstop. All I cared about was pleasure. I looked at women like objects, one night stand after one night stand, constantly being drunk. Some weeks, 4 times a week. Just I didn't understand social drinking, so it was just part of my lifestyle to just be an extremist. So that's how I was living. I was all about myself. I was kind of a half atheist, half agnostic, however the wind blew that day. All I cared about was me. I was the center of my own universe, and I didn't care about anybody else. Had a one-night stand and didn't think anything about it. And a week later, she called me and said she was pregnant. In my arrogance, I'm like, how can that be? If you're going to have a one-night stand with me, how is this mine? I was a massive douchebag with my attitude. And progressed onward. I started having, first time in my life, panic attacks. I was depressed. I was freaking out. And I thought I'd convinced her to have an abortion because I'm arrogant. I'm good with my words, right? That's what I was thinking. So we agreed to meet at the abortion clinic, but I'm an idiot, 21-year-old idiot. We met at a women's clinic, AAA Women's Services. I think that's the name of it. This was back in 2003. So I thought that's the path we were going down. And it was talking about how to make this work. And I just came unglued. I cussed everybody out there, sobbing, crying, ran out the door, drove away. And I never knew 100% if the baby was mine, if she had the baby. I knew she was pregnant, but I never knew if it was fully mine. And it just spiraled me into the darkest darkness that you can go to. And when it was at its worst for me, I remember laying in a Bilo, that's a grocery store, by the way, they're now called Food City, Bilo parking lot, on my face, just face down, sobbing uncontrollably. And this man came up and asked me one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked. He said, "Are you okay?" I'm thinking, like my brain's just spinning. Like I don't know how to answer this. Am I okay? And every day, I just thinking about ending my life, the different ways that I could do it. And for me, the hope was gone. Even in my bad way, the hope was. I wanted a soulmate. I wanted a family. I knew that that's what I wanted deep down. And I felt that this had eliminated all hope that there could ever be my dream coming true.
Did you have like a plan? Were you, was there some, like, were you considering it? Or was there a point where you were like going out and buying a gun, or, did you think about what you might do?
I didn't create a full plan because I'm a very finite individual. If I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And I knew if I made a plan and I put it in motion, I would follow through with it. So at least
that was like your way of protecting yourself.
Yeah. I knew if I got too detailed with it, I would just. I'm not one that I would attempt. At least I would just do it. And so I didn't do that. I started reaching out. My best friend was with me. He knew all what was going on, and he was just kind of there with me in the chaos. And I reached out to another buddy who just seemed like he had peace. He seemed different. I used to party with him a couple of years ago. at the time, and he just seemed different. And I remember walking across Walnut Street Bridge, the walking bridge we call
It's
it here
right
in
outside
Philadelphia.
my window.
Awesome. Beautiful, beautiful bridge. I just remember walking across the bridge and it's like, man, I don't know. Some days I feel like the only way is to blow my head off. Some days I feel like God is like feeling this pain. Some days I feel like it's just this empty void of darkness. Some days I feel like death's like whispering me to come down. I was like, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do, man. Like I just, so we got plugged up together, and I got part of this community, and I started following God, and just totally transformed me as a person. And what happened, I had all this guilt and shame, and you know, what am I gonna do now? And I had this forgiveness, you know, where I wasn't putting such pressure that I had to be perfect, that yeah, I messed up, I screwed up, but I experienced forgiveness and it was okay. And the action step I took was just started serving people. I started volunteering. I started doing simple things like scrubbing toilets and talking to others who had been through traumas in their lives, and just trying to be a servant to other human beings instead of a selfish douchebag that I was being. And
Did you, when you were at your worst, did you feel like alone? Did you feel, was there, you know, did you struggle to connect with other people?
working in the midst of that was excruciating. I was Al Bundy at the time too. I was selling shoes. So I was having to be all customer service and on it when I'm wanting to end my life, like all the time, in this massive depression. So it was extremely difficult to play that character. In hindsight, like I was just having to play a character. My coworkers knew something wasn't right, and I think talking to my best friend and my other buddy, I think that helped tremendously, that I was actually open with them. And then my spiritual mentor later on, I told him about it, and that helped get it off my chest. I'm not a bottler. I don't bottle things up. And if I had of, I probably wouldn't be here today. It cleansed me personally to talk about it. And I'm different than a lot of males. A lot of males, we want to keep things in, but I have to talk about it, or it's like a poisonous cancer inside of me. So in hindsight, that was something good that I did, that I at least talked about it, shared what I was going through, even at the risk of coming out as a terrible human being and doing something horrific, you know. And
I happen to know the end of your story, and I was wondering if you can tell our viewers a little bit about what happened with the whole situation that was plunging you into this terrible depression.
yeah, in the worst of it, all I could see was the present tense, that horrific looping nightmare of hopelessness, that my dream of having a family, having my soulmate, was over with. Well, fast forward 5 years, 2008, I married my soulmate. We've been together since then. The first week of dating, I told her this story. Kind of crazy. So I don't know. I took the risk. She could have just blown me off, but we've been friends a long time. I told her this story. I said, I might have a child out in this world. She said, we'll handle it together if it comes up. I didn't take the high road. I didn't keep pursuing my one night stand to find out what happened, or to find out if it 100% was mine. And I'm saying it on purpose, referring, because that's how I looked at this baby. It was like a thing that wasn't real. It was almost like it had passed into fiction in my mind at this time. It wasn't human. Couldn't be real. Fast forward to 2013. My wife and I had our first little daughter, beautiful, amazing, fiery little princess. on the end of April. She's born. That Father's Day, like a month and a half later, I get a message on Facebook. Hey, I see you and your wife had your daughter together. Would you like to meet your first daughter? And floored me. I read that and I just almost passed out. I just fell down sobbing and crying. It all flooded back to me, all of my bad ways, all of those things I did wrong. I called my best friend up, like, man, I can't believe this. But then when I started scrolling on her profile, I fell in love with my daughter. I was like, she's mine. She's my little twin, but yet beautiful.
I've seen some of the pictures of you and her together, and they're so cute.
Oh, she's amazing. And
how old is she now?
She's 15 now. 15. Yeah, I know I look young, but I got a 15.
Well, you were kind of a baby when it happened, really, you know, when she was conceived. And but yeah, like and so now you have a relationship with obviously with your younger daughter, but with your older daughter as well.
Yeah, I got a 2-for-1 package being a dad. So I have a 15-year-old, but I've only been a dad for like 6 years now. So she's been in my life ever since then. I see her every other weekend. We have an amazing, tight relationship. She even talks to me about boys. I mean, what 15-year-old girl does that with her dad? So I'm so blessed. I'm not worthy to have such a good relationship with her. And we just started driving a month ago. So yeah, I'm in the thick of that.
So, you know, I bet when you were like 20 years old, when all this happened, that this future, like, you know, it sounds like it was a future you hadn't ever considered for yourself. And so it like ruined your idea what your future was going to be. But then like also B, that you could never even dream of a future like this at that time.
100%. The thought of the future was done in my worst. I thought that's not even a possibility. That's why I am hopeless is what I was thinking, what I was going through. That's why I have to end my life, to end this pain, because my dream can't happen now. I've screwed it up so bad. Well, I've got a weird family unit. I've got a weird mixture. It's an interesting story, but it's a true story. And we've grafted in better than we should have. The amazing, wonderful woman that I had one night stand with never badmouthed me to my daughter. She should have. She should have badmouthed me. I was a piece of garbage, and she didn't. So I had a clean slate with my oldest daughter, and it's been amazing. And what I think of now is in the worst, when you're gonna do it, or you think you're gonna do it and end your life, there's experiences to be had that you can't know about. Teaching my daughter how to drive and imparting 20 years of driving experience of wisdom, I didn't know I was going to do that. Talking to her about a boy, and when he broke up with her, you're like, well, maybe you should have these little idiots pass through some tests to make sure they're worthy for you. Like, I couldn't imagine her being so amazing and vibrant and wonderful and beautiful, and having my wife love her like her own daughter, and seeing the sister bond. I couldn't see that, but that's the greatest experiences that are there. They're on the other side of getting past suicide, the amazingness of life.
If you were to give some advice to somebody who had a loved one who was experiencing, you know, who was concerned about somebody who was having suicidal thoughts, or they suspected of suicidal thoughts, what tips might you give them based on what you went through? And what were the things that really, you know, one of the things I heard you say was that your friends really saved your life, quite literally, by showing you that they were there.
Well, first of all, there wasn't this hoity, arrogant judgment. I think if you're strong and you've never dealt with depression, come on, man, just suck it up. There wasn't any of that. And if you have no concept of what it's like to be suffering with depression and suicidal ideation, come from a place of compassion and empathy and just let them talk instead of telling them what to do constantly. If you come at it with that way, maybe a dialogue can begin, especially if they're not I'm a very open communicator, so it's easy for me to talk about anything. But a lot of people aren't, very tight-lipped, and I think that's something my friends did well and didn't even know they did it. And then my spiritual mentor later, he didn't judge me. He didn't hold things against me. Like he looked at where I could be instead of the things I've done. So in hindsight, that's what I was fortunate enough to experience.
Well, thank you so much for sharing both about your experiences and about, some ideas for what people can do to help others. I really appreciate it so much. I know it's hard to share about it. I want you to stay on the line while I talk with Joe, and then we'll have a conversation, all of us, at the end of the call. So I'm going to have you put yourself on mute, and Joe, can you please unmute and just say hello?
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm inspired by Chris's story. I mean, I couldn't help but smiling listening, because that's kind of the ideal scenario in a mucked up situation.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes, so we're actually talking about doing another call about this sort of dark night of the soul, transformative aspect of suicide, because that's an interesting aspect. It's amazing how the thing that was the darkest time became really the light of his life, quite literally.
Yeah, really. And what I was thinking about as Chris was talking about his experience was that, what I'm going to talk about has a different cause, instead of a one-night stand, a bad choice. The cause with vets is an experience in war, in battle. But the outcome, the experiences, a lot of the rest of it is very much the same.
You were going to start out by talking with us a little bit about signs that somebody might be contemplating suicide. And I think we'll probably see some of what Chris talked about in his story in these signs. And so can you share those with us, Joe?
Absolutely. I took this list from an article titled Warning Signs and Steps to Prevent Police Suicide. So this is specifically for police officers, but I'm going to emphasize, most of them can be generalized. It doesn't matter if it's a police officer or not. I think most of them are.
And I will just say, these were the same signs that I was taught on a listening hotline as the general signs. And so this was specifically on the thing for police officers, but these apply to all people. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So here's the list of warning signs. Talking about suicide or death, and even glorifying death. Giving direct verbal cues such as, I wish I were dead, or I'm going to end it all. Giving less direct verbal cues such as, what's the point of living? Soon you won't have to worry about me, or who cares if I'm dead anyway? And it says the person is now self-isolating from friends and family. And self-isolating, I think, is a really important one.
I think that's a real critical key, and some of what we heard Chris saying, that even when he was there, that he kind of wasn't there, like he was sort of going through the motions.
Yeah, I know, with my brother, the self-isolating was extreme. So I know about that one. The next one is expressing the belief that life is meaningless or hopeless. The person starts giving away cherished possessions. The person starts exhibiting a sudden and unexplained improvement in mood after being depressed or withdrawn. This is a counterintuitive one, but it's really important. Exhibiting a sudden and unexplained improvement in mood is a very dangerous sign, because it means the person has come to terms with his or her own death and is relieved that the end is near. So that's a really, really...
Right, because when somebody is really at the depths of depression, this is kind of like, Chris talked about this, that you kind of like can't imagine any action on your own behalf, but then it's kind of actually like a positive thing when you start to actually make a plan. It's a relief, because now you have a thought of a way out of your situation, even if it's not a great way out. And so it calms people down. Sometimes suicide can actually, the thought of suicide can be calming. And as somebody like Chris was saying, like he couldn't like quite go through that last step to make a plan because he knew he'd execute. But, you know, for some people, once they do that, then it's like, okay, I've made a decision. And so now they're much more at peace. I also know that this thing about giving possessions away is actually like a huge, big sign. It's like a big warning flag if somebody starts giving you like things that you know that they really value.
Yeah. The next one is the person starts neglecting his or her appearance and hygiene. The person is annoyed that they're going to do something that will ruin his or her career, but they don't care. The person openly discusses that he or she feels out of control, displays behavior changes that include appearing hostile, blaming, argumentative, and insubordinate, or they appear passive, defeated, and hopeless. Develops a morbid interest in suicide or homicide, indicates that he or she feels overwhelmed and is unable to find solutions to their problems. Ask another officer or a person, ask another person to keep their weapon.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Like, hold my weapon for me, and don't explain why. Yeah. Acting out of...
And I think what I just want to say from my experience with police officers that, you know, that is kind of a cherished possession for a lot of police officers. So, you know, a lot of people, when you're a police officer, what happens to your weapon after you die is something that you have to think about. My husband, he is a police officer, and there's like instructions to his friends about what happens with his guns after he dies, you know, because they can't go to me because I can't legally possess those guns. So, you know, like that's something that police officers think about, is like, you know, it's a possession that comes with a lot of complications.
Right. The next one is acting out of character by inappropriately using or displaying the weapon unnecessarily. Exhibits reckless behavior by taking unnecessary risks on the job or in personal life. The officer acts like he or she has a death wish. The officer carries weapons in a reckless, unsafe manner. Exhibits deteriorating job performance. And the last one is has recent issues with alcohol and or drugs.
Thank you so much for presenting that whole list. And we'll put a link to this list in the comments for this, this video so that you can have access to it and read it. So thank you for sharing all of that information. For police officers, combat veterans, there's a program that the Welcome Home Troops, Project Welcome Home Troops, that you had researched when you were researching your book, and it's using breath-based techniques. So can you tell me a little bit about what that program is and what you learned about it and how it can help somebody who might be considering suicide?
Sure. I just want to preface by saying that, you know, this program I'm going to talk about is certainly not the only one that has shown to be effective for PTSD and other trauma. The reason I'm highlighting it, spotlighting it, presenting it tonight is because of the research that was done with these veterans, a longitudinal study that was done that gives really convincing evidence of how effective it is. I mean, there are other programs that are effective, but they just don't have this kind of data to validate it. So this program is called Project Welcome Home Troops, and it's actually a program developed and presented by an organization, the Art of Living organization from Sri Ravi Shankar. I actually taught.
Interesting. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so I used to teach in Washington, D.C. I taught for the Art of Living Foundation. It was actually a separate yoga studio in their headquarters building.
So Ravi Shankar, just
on Columbia Heights.
If you're thinking that name is familiar, he had a close relationship with George Harrison of the Beatles.
No.
Oh, it's not that Ravi Shankar?
No.
The different one.
No.
So it's not that Ravi Shankar.
Yeah. No.
I was like, oh, it's Ravi Shankar?
No.
Gone together.
You're talking about Ravi Shankar, the sitar player.
Yes.
I'm talking about Sri Ravi Shankar, who is I hesitate to use the word guru, but he's the spiritual leader of the Art of Living organization.
Okay. Thanks for
Glad we
clarifying
got that,
because I would have the whole time been thinking it was he died anyway. That's way off.
Yeah. Okay. So Sri Ravi Shankar's Art of Living Foundation, but like a number of these programs, what's interesting is that if you go to the Art of Living, this breathwork technique, this meditation technique, is not called power breath meditation as it is in the Welcome Home Troops program. For the military, they made a custom design program, changed the language, changed the name. In the Art of Living, it's called Sudarshan Kriya. In the military program, it's called Power Breath Meditation.
I can see where that might be, more appealing to the...
Well, military culture, police culture, you have to present it in a way that will at least get people to listen to you and try it, right? So anyway, it's called Project Welcome Home Troops, and the centerpiece of so let me start by saying it's offered to veterans only, and the veteran will go to it's a week-long retreat with other veterans, and only veterans are allowed in the room so that it creates a safe space, a secure space where confidentiality and there's safety. And they spend this week doing yoga, meditation, discussion, and this breathing practice, which, by the way, is similar to some of the other techniques like holotropic breath work, integrative breath work, transformational breath work. But the point I want to get at is that there was a research study, like I said, on this technique at the University of Wisconsin, and the results were that this program showed a tremendous decrease in symptoms of post-traumatic stress following the workshop. And the kicker is that the results were sustained after 1 year, indicating that the improvement and transformation in the physiology is permanent.
Wow, that's profound. And were they in the follow-up studies, the vets, were they continuing to do this breathwork technique, or were they showing the changes just after attending the workshop and in this immersion? Was it everybody who showed results, or was it if they were continuing to perform the breath work?
specifically, the factoid I remember specifically is that symptoms of PTSD were reduced an average of 40% after 6 months and after 1 year, whether or not the individual kept practicing or not.
Wow, that's amazing.
Isn't it?
Yes. So they attend. So let me just get this straight. They go to a week-long workshop. They learn and practice a breathwork technique along with, I assume, some other information is shared during that week, and not just 1 week of breathwork, but they create a safe space. And the healing that they receive after just 1 week was 1 year later found to be still existing for them. That level of
still, yeah. The
what were they
benefits
measuring?
are durable.
With the stress factors, they were like, physiological stress factors. Is that what they were measuring?
I have that data, but I don't have it in front of me, and I don't want to go scouring around for it right this moment. Fine. But just let me clarify, because I may be oversimplifying it a little. Number one, they go to this workshop for a week. During the workshop, there is yoga, meditation, discussion, community building among the veterans. And following the week, there is follow-up support for anybody who wants to call up their coach. But, again, what blew me away was when I read that even if they didn't continue doing the daily practice they were taught, that still the symptoms of PTSD were 40% at least reduced, and also that 40% reduction in symptoms is at least as good as the other conventional treatments like prescription drugs, talk therapy, and all the rest. And
this is in line with what the latest research on trauma is showing, that it is, body work techniques, breathwork techniques that are effective in healing trauma. And so, it's fascinating to hear about this program. Can you tell me a little bit, is the program, where is the program? Do people have to travel to it? Do they do it on different sites?
It's done at different sites. I actually did an interview by phone with the national director, Leslie Moore, some time ago. And she was telling me about the different cities, different locations. I actually talked to her about my going to one and observing or being, I wanted to be trained to be able to do it with them, for them. So the answer to your question is that it's offered, like the one we were talking about was in New York City. I don't know all the locations.
Sure, but it's good to know that it's not just like a single location, and that they can look on the website and there might be something, if you're on a different coast or something, it might be they might be offering it near you.
Yeah. So let me give you the, if you want to find out more information about the Project Welcome Home Troops, they have a Facebook page, Project Welcome Home Troops. It's a Facebook group or a Facebook page. And they also have a website, and that's www.projectwelcomehometroops.org. And since I'm giving out contact information,
I think you're
I'm going to do that now.
You're breaking up a little bit. Let's go back. Go ahead.
Okay. The Nash Vention hotline. I wanted to give out information. Want to do that right now?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. So
your bandwidth is running low, is what? So Joe, what's happening is Joe's internet is the bandwidth is running low right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start presenting what I have to say. And then once his connection comes back, then, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give out the number. I'm going to go ahead and present about listening hotlines. Joe, even though you can't talk back, thank you so much for sharing about this program. It's really nice to know that there's something out there specifically for vets. The number is 800-273-8255. This is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline.org. And this number is actually the same number that I was about to give out. So as we transition into talking about suicide prevention hotlines, you can also use texting. So you can text home to 741-741 for free 24-hour support from the crisis text line. And so if you don't want to talk but you want to text, you can also text. So I want to give you some information. I volunteered on listening hotline for 2 years. And I want to give you a little information because there was a lot of misconception even when I was working on it by people who were calling. A lot of people thought that in order to call a hotline, you had to be actively suicidal. Like they kind of thought like you had to like have one foot out the door. And sometimes people would call up even like saying like, basically, I'm considering suicide, even though it's kind of sounded like by the time I would talk to them that they weren't particularly. So I think there's a little misconception sometimes around hotlines that you have to be in this like full on crisis mode to call. But crisis hotlines are a resource for anyone. You can call for anything and they will listen to you. They can call to be a support to you. Even if you're just having a bad day, you can call a crisis hotline. If you have a friend who's suicidal, you can call a hotline on their behalf in order to connect services to them. And this is really the big message I want you to know is that if you're trying to get support for a friend who you are concerned about, you're not really equipped to handle it alone. But a suicide hotline, the people there have been trained to recognize how severe the thoughts might be for that person. For example, I asked Chris if he had a plan. That's one of the questions that's on a checklist to assess how serious somebody is, how serious the risk is. The people there are trained to give that assessment survey and to interpret the responses to those questions. And they can actually mobilize resources on the behalf. So that means that while most of the time a call to a hotline is confidential, that they will actually break confidentiality if it's perceived, the listener perceives that the person really is seriously at risk of ending their life. So I want to tell you a little about what it's like to call a listening hotline, because it's a very different listening experience from A, talking to a friend, and B, talking to somebody like a therapist who is in a relationship with you. So the listeners are not there to give you advice or to solve your problems. They are not there to judge you. And this aspect of it that Chris talked about, how important it was that people didn't judge him, that is what listeners on a hotline bring. They're trained in the art of listening. So if you feel down and you think no one will understand, you can call a hotline and they will allow you to express your deepest pain without any judgment. Your pain will be honored. You cannot shock somebody on a hotline, and you can actually talk about things that you would really never talk to somebody like a friend about because it is so dark or you're afraid of scaring them. That's a stranger, and that's sort of the nice thing about talking to a stranger is that there's not an effect on them. You know, you're not talking to them about something that is going to personally affect them, and so it allows them to talk to you in a way that you may not be able to talk to somebody who would be affected by your death or by your deep sorrow. The calls are confidential. As I said, they will break it for you if they need to or for somebody that you're concerned about. The resources they can bring to you will be like an ambulance or a police, so they can actually send them, and they can send them very quickly if you need them. A volunteer can also connect you to support services, which is something you may not think about, a hotline being a resource for support services, but usually they have large databases of websites, of support groups, specialized groups that you can connect to. And so those are some of the things that they can do for you that you might not be aware of. So now I want to give you some 3 facts about suicide that are useful when you're talking to somebody who might be contemplating suicide. Just 3 little facts that you can use in a conversation to help them sort of break through this thought that there is no future that Chris described. So one of them is that when somebody is contemplating suicide, and that means that they're actually on their way up from the very darkest depression. In the deepest depression, you can't really make a plan, and you can't really imagine a future. So suicidal thoughts is actually a positive thing. It actually means that you're starting to grow, out of the depression. So if you can get people through that phase, they actually are on their way up often. So I think it's just nice to let people know that it's actually a sign that things might be getting better for them, because at that moment they're still experiencing that it's not. The second thing is a little dark, but it's important that it sort of helps people to see that things maybe aren't so bad. But if you think your life is really crappy now, imagine if you were not successful in your suicide attempt. There are many, many people who live in vegetative states and hospitals who have very reduced capacities because that gun missed. They didn't take the right amount of pills. You think your life sucks right now? Imagine if you tried to commit suicide and you just did it really badly, and you ended up really with a lifelong debilitating, mental disability or physical disability. It happens a lot. You can bring it up with somebody who's contemplating suicide, and it kind of helps them to see, like, it's not, life isn't as bad as you think it could be. And a lot of people don't ever consider what might happen if they weren't successful. And the third one is the one that Chris and I talked about, which is you don't know the end of the story. And for a lot of people, that's a powerful message that you can talk with them about, the fact that they don't really know, like right now, like with Chris had ended his story right at that low point. He would have never got through to the side where he really got to know his daughter and have this other future that he wasn't contemplating at the time. Not knowing the end of the story is something that's powerful for a lot of people. They don't know that sense that there's another ending and they don't know what it is, can be very useful. So there's 3 little tips to help you. Oops, I'm pulling up my notes and now Siri wants to get involved. And finally, I'm going to give you those are 3 facts that you can share, and then 3 tips for talking to somebody who's contemplating suicide. So the first one is it's okay to ask if they are contemplating ending their life. And that is the most difficult thing to do. I had to be trained to do it, because we would never say that to somebody. Like, you would never say to a friend, like, are you thinking of committing suicide? Because it's such a taboo in our society. It's okay to ask. If they are not, they will just very rapidly tell you, like, no, I'm not, But if they are, it'll be just a tremendous relief that somebody saw it, that somebody expressed concern, and somebody gives them permission to talk about that feeling. The second thing is that you should reflect their emotions as deeply and powerfully as they are feeling them. So if somebody is considering suicide, then you can say to them, you are so depressed, you feel so hopeless that you are thinking of ending your life. And you can say these very powerful, words back to them. So that actually gives them permission to speak of it. It's a relief for them to actually hear the emotions that are so strong. I've had some very powerful experiences reflecting these very deep emotions back to people in a state of crisis. So if you're talking to somebody and you hear these emotions, don't be afraid to use very strong language to express the emotions colorfully. And then the third tip is to make sure that you tell them how much you love them and how much you care about them and how much you would miss them if they were gone. It's very important that you say that. And even if the person you're talking to, you don't even really know that well, you still need to express care. On a listening hotline, that's one of the things that I was trained, even on a hotline, was to tell people, and these were strangers that were calling me, that I cared about them because I was the person they were connected to at the time, and it was important that they heard that somebody cared. So please let your friends know they care. Chris talked about this, how important it was. Joe talked about this. Then if you don't remember anything else from this call, I want you to remember that you need to, that is the most important thing you can do is let somebody know that you care about them. So thank you for listening to all of this. I'm going to open up I'm going to let Chris and Joe open up just for a minute because we've had a pretty long call. And I'm going to just give us a chance to say goodbye, and then we're going to stop the recording and open up and let our guests talk to us all. So is everybody off mute? Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm going to switch it back to the panel view. And there we go. So now we can all are visible on the camera right now. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share, Chris?
Just to reiterate what you're saying, you don't know the future. You don't know what your final chapter is going to be. And there's hope embedded in all of our lives. We don't understand it sometimes, and just give it another moment, give it another day, give it another week, give it another month. Just keep living and find that next mountain to climb. Don't let your worst moment be your final chapter.
I'm not glad that you went through that experience, because I don't, wouldn't wish for somebody to feel that sadly. But I am glad that you went through it because of the transformation that you experienced and, like the true joy that you have in your life, because what you described of your life before was really a life that really didn't really, where you didn't really have joy in your heart all along. And then somehow you get hit the point where like suddenly all of the coping mechanisms that you have just stopped working for you, and you had to really take a look at your whole life.
Right. That's exactly it. I appreciate you noticing that. And, coming from that darkness that I was so close to giving into, you don't know what's on the other side. I mean, I know how blessed I am. And even when I have a bad day now, I can think all this wouldn't be possible if I hadn't have went through that experience. And I believe just talking about my experiences and telling this story can give someone freedom, license to talk about what they went through. And it like you say, it's still such a taboo in our society to talk about the S word, suicide, like you're defective to even bring it up. At least that's what we can think of how someone would perceive us. And
especially in these very masculine cultures, I think, it's just like you were talking about, sort of, that college party atmosphere. And then, Joe's talked about the military, these kind of cultures. It's even, it's like less likely to find those supports in those environments. So I'm really happy that you're sharing from your perspective what you did. I think it's really important that these communities start talking about these issues and knowing it's okay to have those feelings.
Definitely.
So Joe, thank you. Joe, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share? Now that your mic is back too, and you're because you sort of just disappeared on us.
I really appreciate Chris sharing your transformation through the dark night of the soul, because as you know, my passion is for transformative learning and transformation. And for many of us, going through these things, whether it goes to the depths of suicidal ideation or simply major depression, that it is a natural process. It is part of the maturing process. And I think, what I heard Chris describing was a growing up process, very much, and if you can make it through the dark night of the soul, which in transformative learning theory is called disorienting crisis, if you can make it through without ending it, what tends to happen is that you come out on the other side as a different person. You come out on the other side as a more evolved human being. And there are all kinds of examples, like Eckhart Tolle and Buddha and all kinds of individuals who part of their becoming who we know them as was passing through this kind of thing. And so obviously number one, our purpose is to help prevent people from taking that drastic step of ending their own life. That's the subject tonight. And then number two, how to do our part to change the conversation around depression and suicidal tendencies, to reframe it as a spiritual experience.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to, I'm glad you sort of opened the door up for that, because that's a follow-up conversation that we're looking to have. And so I want to let you know, if you're interested in that conversation, please let us know in the comments, and we'll be, let you know about that, and we'll add that to the comments once we do that follow-up call, so that you can link to that one. And also just thank you so much for letting us know about the resources that are there for our troops. We really appreciate if you are a loved one of somebody who served, or you are a veteran. We really appreciate your service, and we want to make sure that you're cared for. And so this is a program that is available to you. And if that one doesn't work for you, then you can also call a listening hotline. Anybody can call a listening hotline and find resources. If you are concerned that a friend is possibly contemplating suicide, I urge you to call a suicide hotline on their behalf. Let them help you to make the assessment of whether to bring resources to them or not. And we will put the link below to the suicide hotline and their call, and also their numbers. Thank you so much to Chris and to Jeff for this call. Thank you. Bye.